So, I think we should get started. I can't really see how many people have joined us. I hope there are quite some people already. Oh, it's just six. I'm sure more people will join us. So, yes, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Ivo in our Sustainable Research Talk series. Many of you know him really well, better than I do, I guess. But I'll give a brief introduction anyway, because there might be some people you know in the audience who haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting Ivo in person. And also, this is what you normally do, and it's always nice to, for the speaker to get this kind of introduction when people say nice things about them. Ivo brings this amazing wealth of experience and knowledge in environmental science, broadly speaking, but also climate policy, as well as public engagement. And I'm sure that, his talk this afternoon is going to be super informative and inspiring. So very briefly, Ivo, you can correct me if I say something which is not quite true, but this is what I found from internet. You have more than 15 years of experience in environmental science and policy. So you got your PhD from one of the universities in Sweden. You worked for some years at the Estonian Ministry of Environment as a scientific advisor and climate advisor to senior management. And later, Ivo also spent a couple of years in Brussels as Estonia's environmental attaché. So on top of sort of everything he knows about Estonia, he also knows the Brussels corridors fairly well. But what I really appreciate about Ivo's activities, on top of all his professional work and everything, is that he's been an active public communicator on climate, I think energy as well, and environmental issues. So he runs, at least he used to run a blog, which was super interesting, and a YouTube channel. I don't know if you still do this. And also, I think you started a podcast. Not quite sure how is this going, but anyhow, I'd say you are one of the most well-known influencers in this field. And right now, Ivo leads the Climate Systems and Energy Policy Unit at the Stockholm Environment Institute, Tallinn. So I think it's a perfect position and role for Ivo, where he can combine both his scientific expertise with public outreach and policy leadership. So in his talk today, to wrap it up, Ivo will talk about his work on mapping the green policies in three countries, namely Ukraine, Moldova and Armenia, and this is going to be in the context of EU accession of those countries. So the floor is yours, Ivo. Again, welcome, and welcome to all the participants in this Sustainable Research Talk session number 5.
Thank you very much, Hanno, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'll try to get my slides up on the screen. I hope they're basically now all ready and done. It's always very first of all, of course, very nice to hear all the nice things about oneself. However, now I do feel like I will have to work very hard not to disappoint with my presentation and kind of bring myself down after that. But yes, I worked in the field. I must update my LinkedIn profile as I think the text I wrote there was a few years out of date. But yes, I've done most of like the professional part of my life has been looking at the various sides of how to actually improve the the state of the environment, initially through research, much more, but now through a lot of policy work. And the presentation I'm bringing you today is a little bit of both in a sense. It's more from the policy world. In a sense, we have looked at a lot of different aspects of the countries Ukraine, Moldova, and Armenia to get a better understanding of where they are with their environmental policies, what is there and what is not. And I added this context of the EU accession because this is a very important part of their policy directions at the moment. Moldova and Ukraine are very strongly seeking inclusion into the European Union, and Armenia is also in many ways trying to align their legislative basis, their economy with the EU. So from the perspective of these countries, it's very important. And as I kind of come to this aspect in the talk as well, I think here in Estonia, we tend to kind of forget how big of a deal this kind of work towards the European Union is. We kind of get bogged down with all of these legislations and all of these strategies and all of the discussions around where and how we want to go as a country. And it is almost, from my perspective, refreshing to look at countries where there is very little confusion about this aspect. It is an understanding that working with the EU, working towards the EU, is something of high value, and there is very little debate around that in the society. Although, of course, once you get into these societies, you see a lot of different opinions and views. So that's generally what I'll try to kind of give with my talk, and I'll start just a little bit with introducing how all of this came to be. We started in 2023 initially with a project that is supported by the Swedish International Cooperation Agency, International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, on quite a simple idea that is in itself rather nuanced and complicated in many ways. But the idea was to look at Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, and Armenia, countries who are in various stages of kind of working towards the EU, in working in kind of different formations in institutional way, kind of working with the energy community, working in the Eastern Partnership, etc., and get a better understanding of what the green transition means for them. 2023 was still a very active year in terms of the development of the Green Deal in the European Union. And from one side, this was a large question for the EU member states as well. Questions around, what does it mean to actually achieve climate neutrality? What changes will this mean? What kind of policies will be coming? Whereas in many cases in these countries, the question was far more complicated. In the case of Ukraine, there was an active invasion from Russia going on. And even though we can look at our public sector and look at our policies and look at our development and say, these environmental sides are quite complicated, in these countries, it's a whole nother level of complicated in many ways, because a lot of the things that we almost take for granted now, having made the transition to the European Union and taken over this large set of legislation, this a key for the environment, which is and I might be mistaking in this at the moment, but at least a few years ago, this was still very much relevant, which was the largest key in the whole of the European kind of legislative space. So we started with this idea. I have to mention right from the beginning, I have kind of made the Georgian flag a little bit transparent. As you know, the political developments in Georgia took a turn away from at least from a national level, from the European Union, and cooperation and support for the government is not something that the European countries at the moment are doing in these kind of high-level national ways. So also we in our project had to make a change where we don't really work on the direction of Georgia. However, the work with the other three countries has remained. The idea was to set up this project in kind of 5 stages, to get a full understanding of where the countries are, so make a national assessment of the green transition, get an understanding of what does it mean for them strategically speaking, what kind of legislations are already in place, how they are planning to do this. And from the experience of European countries, kind of the idea was not to really duplicate, what the Commission is doing with the accession process, and look at how far along translation of different laws is, and so on, but rather get a better understanding of how they are working in the space of the green transition. So from my perspective, this means kind of creating the right governance structures, creating the right ways of understanding what the society itself is ready for, how it sees the transition, and building up the kind of justice aspects of the transition as well. So getting a broader view, because in many cases, what we saw with kind of initial work is that it's almost and totally understandably treated as an exercise of just translating laws, and then hopefully the transition will kind of emerge somewhat from that. So this was the first step, and this is really the one that I will be concentrating on in today's talk. What did we learn out of that? The idea with the project itself is to also kind of go then more deeply into the sectors, develop a framework for sectoral strategies, and then build up a kind of an investment-ready project pipeline, or build up an understanding of how these projects could be financed or should be financed with the help of course, international support and different donors. And throughout all of the project, we are also doing quite a lot to advance technical support and capacity building, and supporting them in communication. And the reason why this kind of 5-stage process was really to set up was to get a comprehensive view. I will kind of dig down into the national assessment work. So here we did 3 stages of work. We started with kind of an assessment report, which is kind of an insight to understand what kind of activities are going on in the country, how is the transition being seen. Then this is more from the government side, from the stakeholder side, from the legislative space, but also from kind of how different NGOs, companies, how the sector itself looks at the transition. Then we looked at the public perception. This is very much related to also some of the work that is being done and planned in the Sustain Era project. Because from our point of view, it was also kind of really important to get a better understanding of the societies themselves, and what for the people in general is a green transition. What do they even think about, if at all, about the environment and climate space? And we also built up a climate neutrality tool to support the policymakers in their calculations, assessments of the measures and their costs and their social costs that would be occurring. We looked at basically 8 different key thematic areas as we looked at them, and then 4 additional cross-cutting areas that would be kind of important within all aspects of the transition. If you remember in the beginning, I said that we built upon kind of the view of the Green Deal in the EU at the time. This was kind of an initial framing, and as we know over the years, the green transition has taken a different narrative approach in the EU, with kind of a reduction of the Green Deal and so on. So we also kind of reframed some of the discussions within the context of the EU accession, and making sure that the view of the green transition is not seen as something of a European thing, but rather something that needs to be also successful for the countries themselves. But the key thematic areas were built on kind of this basis. So we of course looked at the climate and energy space. This also meant looking at buildings, renovation, looking at mobility, transportation, industry, and general kind of environmental pollution, agriculture, and biodiversity, and these were kind of the base package of what we looked at. And to kind of make sure that we are also understanding them from a deeper and wider basis, we looked at kind of enablers and kind of supporters of this transition. So we looked at what kind of financing structures are currently in place in these countries, how is just transition being viewed at, how is digitalization looked at as a possible supporter of the transition, and how the research and innovation space is treating the direction. The climate neutrality modeling work was rather important in this aspect as well, because we wanted to get a quantitative view on this, and this came from experience that we looked at from Estonia. So in 2018, 2019, the discussions around whether or not Estonia should support the target of climate neutrality was a very kind of strong discussion point in society, and there were a huge number of questions that really didn't allow for this discussion to go forward. So the questions were around mostly, whether this is even possible, how much would it cost, how many jobs would it kind of lose or create, would people need to change their lifestyles in a very dramatic sense? And these were very high level political questions that really stopped any sort of actual policy discussions from happening. So in 2019, SCI developed a tool for the Estonian government that allowed for these questions to be answered, and of course we then saw that there was clarity in the government to support setting a climate neutrality target. And so we saw a very similar fears and a very similar approach needed in these countries. So we developed a very similar tool to allow for this. So we are kind of we basically set up a tool that takes its basis from the international climate framework in terms of what sectors are covered. So we cover energy, transport, agriculture, LULUCF, industrial processes, waste, and built the tool in a way that it could be used by policymakers themselves in a user-friendly way. So what we know in these countries is that this kind of mathematical modeling around climate measures, energy measures, is something that only a handful of people with very specific skills can do. And this limits and this slows down a lot of the progress. So the idea was that within the context of this project, not only give this kind of this general view of, okay, this is the policy side, this is the public view, but also give the support of a tool. So these tools were built for all of the 4 countries initially, but now we are in process of delivering to the 3 countries so that these can be used in order to answer a lot of their questions. I won't be presenting any of the results at the moment from this modeling side, mostly focusing on the policy analysis and the public perception, because of course a lot of these scenarios and outputs of how these countries would be developing with measures towards climate neutrality will still need to be kind of developed together with the governments. But this is kind of an important side of the entire project. So having the methodology part kind of covered a little bit, I'll try to give a view of how the 3 countries kind of looked next to each other initially. And because my own side of the work was focused on Ukraine, I'll be a little more specific about Ukraine as the talk goes on. But we try to really create a report that doesn't give you just a list of things saying like, look, these are translated, these are not, this is what you need to do, but rather get a big picture view of how the transition is being seen. So what we see in all of the project countries is something that I started with, something that we still see as a very big positive side, is that the EU approximation is the dominant driver for the green transition. From one side, this means that public support for really the things that get the countries closer to the EU is very high. But from another side, this is a question because it does mean that it can be only construed from this one viewpoint. So we've seen this similar issues coming up in Estonia as well, that people don't really consider this a thing for us, but a thing for them. And this is something that we do need to kind of take account for. However, from the perspective of actually developing the legal basis and moving towards a common goal, this is something that is a strength in many ways as well. We've seen climate laws being developed and accepted in Moldova and Ukraine in 2024. We see Armenia in the progress of this. We see them actually accepting these overarching goals and transition kind of bases for them, and this is positive. We also see energy for all of these countries being kind of the core set of emissions and of course a security challenge. I don't have to explain the questions of what kind of a challenge the energy sector is today for Ukraine. I think we all see it in the news and on social media every day. But of course, it's important to understand that both Armenia and especially Moldova, through issues with Transnistria, is also very much kind of dependent on their external or internal security from external forces that may become problematic. So building up energy systems that help with decarbonizing, taking away this legacy infrastructure that is keeping the emissions high, is something that is a very core need for all of the countries. We also see a lot of problematic sides of actually implementing. So it's very easy to set targets, and of course it's even easier to set targets if you kind of consider somewhere in the back of your head, but that you never have to really achieve these targets. But it's also incredibly important, and this kind of comes down to actually translating the European legislation. It's really important to set up implementation systems that allow for constant reporting, constant verification, and allow for data systems to be built so that it doesn't become a burden. So one of the issues that we do see in Europe as a whole is that environmental data is incredibly large. It's complicated. It needs to be handled, analyzed in complex ways. And we do understand and see that, especially with the smaller countries in the project, there is not a lot of, even just people able to do these things. So the way that these implementation systems get set up will be a large challenge. Also, finance is quite a big constraint, mostly because there is very little good understanding of the long term here. It's built on high donor dependence, which from many aspects you do understand as how it is. However, there are a lot of things that are missing from the countries themselves, a very environmentally friendly tax system, a sustainable financial architecture, basic things that would be needed in order to ensure sustainability of financing of these. And then we get to the human side. So the human capital and local skills, this is a fairly big problem in all of the project countries. There's a shortage of these green skills. There's a shortage of understanding even what they are and how they should be developed fully. However, we do see as a positive side, universities kind of taking this challenge on fairly well and developing on that. And we see also kind of, especially at the municipal level, it's very difficult for them to ensure the full development of this. And then the just transition side, even kind of more is being pushed to the side. It's mostly seen as something to do with coal. It's mostly seen as something to go out of a fossil fuel dependency, which of course is very much related. However, it should be viewed much more in a broad way, as we've seen also in European countries where some of the challenges have come up, not only from the changes that are required in the fossil fuel sectors, but also in other sectors very much dependent on the changes needed. So what can we say about the three countries in itself? Of course, Ukraine has actually quite a strong momentum in its climate and energy policy. They're developing this very fast because they know they have to. However, the war is the defining constraint for them. Of course, there is no way to kind of go around that, and it's creating a situation where, talking about even monitoring systems, enforcement, infrastructure, investments in the context of the war is very, very difficult. It is still a need, and there is still a need and a very big support in viewing the reconstruction efforts as a way to kind of quickly and more efficiently align with the EU objectives, being able to exchange a lot of the aging infrastructure. We see in Moldova high ambition and strong digital foundations, but however, generally quite weak enforcement. Moldova again is making quite a lot of progress in especially the climate and energy side. And the digital side and support from the government on digitizing a lot of these things is quite high. However, we're talking about a smaller country. There are more weaknesses in actually implementing a lot of these things, monitoring quality, environmental pollution control, and there is just a lot of things kind of working against their public sector in making sure that this is fairly well actually developed. And Armenia, we see partial progress. It is different from Moldova and Ukraine in a way that for them, the European accession isn't kind of the central argument. They're more kind of aligning themselves more with the EU, but we do see kind of slower alignment, especially in things like waste control, pollution, circular systems, and food systems. So a lot of these things kind of see less development. The institutions are weaker. They are very dependent on foreign and kind of outside support on many of these things, and this is definitely a weakness that needs to be done. We also looked at the public perception, like I mentioned, and a few interesting things did arise from there. If we look at the whole of the three countries, what really kind of sticks out very clearly is for people, again, talking about climate, as in many cases, it also is similar in Estonia, hopefully not like that fully. But talking about climate really doesn't align for people with green transition, with environmental priorities. So for them, mostly, we're talking about things like water, about food, about waste, and air quality. These are really the kind of main things. People do understand the values of green spaces and biodiversity. This especially came out in Armenia and Moldova, and this was a very good thing. And of course, it's also good that people kind of align or understand that the quality and the healthiness of the food is dependent on the way that we treat the environment, that air quality is dependent on the way we pollute, etc. But in all of these countries, having traveled to at least Ukraine and Armenia myself as well, you can kind of see where the people are coming from, especially if you're in the streets, if you see the air quality issues, it is something that is very clear for them. We also kind of try to get a better understanding of what information channels they are looking for with kind of like where they would like to get information from, how it works. And we do see kind of Facebook and TV being very much kind of prevalent throughout. And of course, in Ukraine, especially with younger people, Telegram, which is not perhaps the most positive of things, is something that is also used as a very basic information source. What we also saw through all of these kind of countries is that professional analysis, research-based results, trusted sources, unbiased facts, this kind of comes down to as the most important thing for people. So they don't want to see kind of empty rhetoric. What they want to see is kind of very clear changes, facts, and how it actually works. We also looked at kind of some general, like who is being seen as trustworthy, who is not. Interesting to see in Moldova, local governments ranked very high. In Ukraine, volunteers, youth activists, these ranked very high. But we also saw the same local government side in Ukraine, and this kind of made this realization that I think a lot of these challenges, when tackled, should really be tackled more from the local side, because there is much more trust in kind of the local government, and it's much more closer to you. So this does work. To household renewables, most of people, of course, say it's expensive. However, a positive thing that came out was that generally support for these, for wind and solar development is very, very high. Kind of this education and awareness campaigns is something that people see as what they need, because when we kind of looked into why they are not participating, for example, if they say, NGOs are good, activists, volunteering is very good, all these things are very nice. why aren't you there? But generally, people either said they don't have a lot of awareness, they don't have any time or money in this, and there's a lot of indifference about the issues, a feeling of not being able to make a big change in this. And so this is very important to get an understanding as well. So learning from this, from the point of view in terms of our project as well, if we need to develop even like sectoral measures, it's very important to make sure that affordability inclusion is kind of, when designing measures, in the center of a lot of these, and local level really helps in this as well, making sure that whatever measures, for example, for renewable deployment or energy efficiency improvements are being made, they're made in a very inclusive and affordable way. And of course, when framing these discussions, it needs to be framed from a very tangible place. So how it affects your health, your food, your water, your bills. So these were kind of very central in this. It's important to use trusted messengers and channels that work. And it is also important to start reducing the friction to participation, to make sure that we looked at how to actually ensure that people see the responsibility and see that what they do actually can make a difference. Looking at the time, understanding that, like always, I tend to be very verbose and saying very little. I'll try to go through some of the more specific outputs that we saw in Ukraine a little faster. So starting with where we ended up with the whole of the picture, looking more into the public with Ukraine, what we do see is people generally feel that they have a fairly good or even a very good understanding of climate, for example. And generally, we're talking about knowledge being peaking in the 45 to 54 age group. Kind of looking at that, it also does feel like very much we're talking about people in their 40s and 50s, considering that they have a good understanding of climate. It sometimes in my head kind of aligns with these studies that have been done in Estonia, where people of course feel like they are doing good things for the environment, and they're very environmentally friendly because they do a little bit of recycling. And here we also saw that actually understanding the main drivers and problems is something of a limitation. What we saw is deforestation for most Ukrainians is very highly linked to climate. And while it is very highly linked to climate, there is no denying that the main drivers of why climate change is occurring is something that is more in the background. So this link that we also see in Estonia, for example, where people are very, very highly linked to forests and very much kind of care for the preservation and protection of forests, but less about climate. This is somewhat also seen in Ukraine. For them, for the people, generally air quality and waste management are the top concerns, and they really want waste management to be dealt with as a priority to ensure that everything around them is clean and well taken care of. The interesting part is renewable energy, because from one side there is skepticism, especially in rural areas, and there is a possibility that in poor policy management, in ways where, for example, things like environmental impact assessments are being pushed a little bit to the side because the situation is as it is, which is fully understandable in many circumstances right now in Ukraine. Or when locals aren't well taken into the discussions about why these things would be needed and where would they be developed, for example, with wind farms or solar farms, then there is a potential for especially non-urban areas to become more against these developments. However, as a whole population and as the country is concerned, there is a high level of support for renewables because they do fully understand and see the renewable development as something that is very much supporting their security as well, because we're talking about decentralized energy production, and we are talking about something that they have close to them, something that is much harder to push out of actual operation in a time of war. And if we look at kind of, again, the environmental issues, you can see here just a little bit of a graph on things that I already have mentioned: air quality, waste management, food quality, both through how agriculture is being set up, and how food products are being advertised or developed in general. But also generally seeing, we do see people still like having the green spaces mind and in their mind as well. Going through how the policy looked, I have to explain this a little bit in a sense that when I say, for example, climate change and energy have significant progress in green transition readiness, I don't mean that everything is already taken care of and it's very high ambitious and very well aligned, especially when talking about energy. The energy systems themselves need to be redeveloped in very many cases and are in a very poor state. However, what we do see is that the willingness to take a decarbonization approach, the willingness to develop the legislative space for it and set goals, this shows significant progress, and there is a lot of support for this. And this is very understandable as well, being that climate change has been the high point, the biggest focus of the discussions in the past few years about the green transition. And of course, we can understand very much how everything is also very much linked to that, and also that having a very specific carbon tunnel vision doesn't really help, because the problems with pollution and biodiversity loss go further on. But we do see that where the focus of the policy in a large global space does get some more attention. Of course, because there is a high interest in developing all of the areas that need to be aligned for the EU, we do see progress being made in basically across the board. What we do see as biggest issues is, for example, environmental pollution topics, things that have to do with actually setting up very good guidelines and clarity on industrial waste management, making sure that everything is tracked and reported and verified and monitored. These are complicated issues, and especially with the environmental impact assessment and strategic impact assessment, there are a lot of issues that have been raised by NGOs. And of course, it is impossible to overlook the damage that the Russian invasion has done for the environment. So this is very much also a huge contributor to the environmental pollution side, and makes things very much more difficult. And of course, like I mentioned before, just transition is also a topic that is not fully utilized, that is not fully understood, and will need much more development, seeing that Ukraine is very much kind of an industrial country at the moment. It will be something to see how the development will go with the economy in the future. However, the just transition aspect definitely is of importance. And just to kind of show you how the climate policy is being developed now over the coming years, there is as you can see, like I mentioned, a significant progress. There's a plethora of activities that come from both the energy community and the European Union direction, from the country's own view of how it should be integrating the climate policy, from the United Nations level, and there is a lot of development that goes currently in the country. So the climate law has created the basis for the country for reaching climate neutrality by 2050. It also, something that I was very happy to see, contains quite a lot of guidance on adaptation, which in a country where climate change effects are much more kind of understandable, real, and at the forefront, is of course understandable. They do have a bigger worry for adapting to climate change. And you also see ETS and the price of carbon as being a huge question. Because for them, the developments around carbon border adjustment measure and even just generally pricing carbon are quite difficult to figure out internally, because there will be rather industrial questions around how to set these targets, what will be the price, and why all of this is needed. So this is definitely a challenge, but a lot of development is going on in the space. And there's three things that kind of stick out to figuring out the transition. From one side, it's horizontal coordination. We do see today that basically the economy ministry, the environmental ministry, and the agricultural ministry have all been put together into one big conglomerate of a ministry, which from one side may help with some coordination, but in reality rather shows, or what we have heard from different stakeholders, is that the environment is being pushed to the side, which often happens in many of these cases where these kinds of mergers have been made. But it's kind of important to create better and more open and transparent governance structures in order to ensure that all of the different aspects of the green transition are being met. And we should really be talking about, in addition to horizontal coordination, this vertical side as well, bringing in the local governance and local municipalities into the fold so that they have the capacity and understanding of how to steer it from their side as well. This all requires, of course, human resources and skills, which, when you have to send a lot of your experts either to the front lines or they are not in your country at the moment, is a huge challenge, and this will have to be dealt with. And finally, land use and land planning. We will see a lot of development in the reconstruction efforts. A part of the land is mined or damaged by war. This is already a huge problem. There will need to be an understanding that, for example, forested land, there will be demand for biomass, there will be demand for agricultural lands and building of new infrastructure. But also the forests themselves are important for biodiversity preservation and climate goal achievements as well. So there will be definitely kind of a mixture of different demands and needs on the land that needs to be well planned out and strategically looked at. However, what we do see is that, and especially in the case of Ukraine, the damaged infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt can be rebuilt in a way that is decentralized. We do see that a lot of the developments that have happened in Ukraine, for example, in terms of their defense industry, can be taken into the green industry space as well, and it actually can harbor a lot of research, innovation, and manufacturing capabilities that a lot of the EU countries themselves don't have at the moment. So it's not a very far-fetched thing to kind of think about the current drones used in combat being developed for usage in protection of the environment, in monitoring, in surveillance, and in terms of even just, for example, some agricultural aspects, and these things have already been studied quite a bit. But there are definitely other ways in which this kind of really fast-paced, digital, and well kind of developed industrial base can support in kind of transitioning to a more greener industry. And of course, digitalization is actually very, very highly and well developed in Ukraine. They do look at Estonia as a very big kind of a example of as inspiration, but they do build upon it quite a bit. So it's wonderful to kind of go there and see that they've taken several steps ahead from us, and the things that we see that Estonia is very good at, and for example things that we can do in our browsers on our computers, they can do already in apps on their phones, and this is really a good prerequisite for building on the twin transition. The difficulty will be, of course, to modernize industries and actually ensure that the best practices are being taken over, that circularity is being taken over, that new fuels and new energy carriers are being taken over, and this definitely will be quite a big challenge. So in our project as well, we've taken in next steps of looking at the steel industry, at agriculture, at energy, to be much more concrete and specific about the changes that would need to be made. And it's also important, like I mentioned before, two things. First of all, the balance between in infrastructure development and also nature preservation needs to be struck. And this will all need a lot of really smart and well kind of inspired people to do all of these things. So luckily, in the case of Ukraine, we do see a lot of support for that in universities, but this is definitely something that needs to be done in a very strategic manner. A few words about the next steps. So as you can see, the assessment side is over. I have put into the slides. I don't know if they will be shared, but hopefully, likely, I can send it to I can send them to be shared one way or another. Hopefully, I don't know if I have access to the list of participants, but at any case, you can look at the national assessments for each of the countries in separate and the public perception studies as well. We are currently working with specific sectors and how to decarbonize them and how to build up these clean industrial strategies, and we'll then kind of make we'll figure out a way to support to ensure that actually a lot of these measures can be funded in a way that is acceptable and easily accessible to different funders, but also for the country themselves to manage. Because again, when looking at the analysis of funders, we do see that there is a lot of funding opportunities, but the capabilities of actually ensuring that the funding is used properly and all of the funding is used in its maximum capability is a limiting point. So there's definitely support to be made on that as well. But that's it for the presentation side. I tried to stay in 40 minutes. I don't think I fully did. But again, I have the links here, and hopefully you can get to the reports if you're interested in them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivo. It was exactly 40 minutes and a couple of seconds because I used the first 5 minutes, to introduce you and say hello to the participants. So very well done. Yes, super interesting. And I'm happy to open the floor for questions. Who wants to go first? I can ask a first question if there are no volunteers. I'm always happy to ask questions. I'm just trying not to ask too many questions. So I was wondering when I was listening to your talk and from the start till the end, as you mentioned, this sort of EU accession thing is like one of the motivating factors, quite big, behind all the movement. So what will happen, hypothetically speaking? Of course, I don't think it will happen, and hopefully it won't happen. But let's say the EU says, for whatever reason, political, economical, that, no guys, no way, nothing's going to happen in the next, I don't know, 20-something years, it was nice, but we go our separate ways. What will happen to those green policies? I mean, is it like the ball is rolling and it's going to roll anyhow? Or, you see what I mean? Is it yeah.
There's two ways that this can happen, and neither are actually even that fully hypothetical. So one of the scenarios is that the EU itself loses interest in, like you mentioned, the accession or widening. And this we don't really have to be even like fully hypothetical about it. The EU has lost interest in widening several times, unfortunately, in the past, and countries like, for example, Serbia, you can see that the people there are not really fully happy with the progress and so on. And I think this is a valid concern and actually something that we do have to consider from the EU side as well, that when we make promises that we want you to become members and we expect you to work towards that, we have to kind of keep those promises, because once you kind of start backpedaling and say, oh no, we still want you to do a bit more and so on, then we get to a point where society loses interest and they don't really want to work very they don't want to make huge changes and huge commitments, and then you, especially with green policies, which can be hugely challenging and difficult and costly. These things don't happen fully. And the other side that can happen, of course, is that the EU kind of targets away from climate and biodiversity and general green goals in a strong sense. And again, this already has happened a little bit. So the policy direction changes, strategic changes that have been seen on the EU level, in reality, if you look at what changes have happened, not a lot has happened from a legislative perspective. There's definitely things like every time I say this, I want to start arguing with myself, because there are definitely very important and problematic changes. However, if you look at the big picture, things are as they stand, especially for the countries that are seeking inclusion. However, the change in rhetoric has already had its effects, and the countries are looking at, this, we don't have to be so fully aligned with everything because we see that the EU has already backpedaled a little bit here and there. So they do see an opening. So these things can be problematic. Saying all of this, however, I think the big things will be done anyway. For example, the modernization of industry and energy systems. Some of the modernization in agriculture will be required anyway, because just the steel plants, the energy boilers, everything is just too old, needs to be replaced, has been either destroyed here and there, and so on. So these changes will definitely need to happen at any rate. But yeah, it will definitely be much slower and much more problematic if you don't have this kind of clear goal that you're moving towards. Unfortunately, the green transition itself is not seen as this clear goal, but rather as an enabler of inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ivo. I see Lauri has a question as well, but before I give floor to Lauri, just I'm going to read out some text from Marina. Marina Verkina, welcome. Marina says, hello, thank you, very crucial. She's from Ukraine, and different issues are arising, especially ecology. But for now, our society tries to survive. So this is, of course, very true, and we are all, we all stand with Ukraine today and tomorrow. So, but Lauri.
Perhaps Marina actually wants to go first because you already,
right.
yeah, she has her hand up as well.
Yes,
I'm happy to give way.
Yes, of course, Marina, you can go first. Sorry, I didn't see your hand right away.
Thank you so much, dear audience, for the interesting meeting. And I have listened to interesting information about Ukrainian side, about Moldova and Armenia. And such as I'm origin from Ukraine, I can add some comments why we have a big issue, as Ivo mentioned, about law regulation, especially on the ecology side. But for now, it's very complicated to predict what kind of new rules we should set up due to the current situation. I just tried to a little bit explain the main issues. First of all, Russian use different kind of weapons with different chemical specifics, and that's why our ecologists and our scientists cannot understand what we can do and how we can predict and how we can help even for the in order to avoid air pollution or in order to reduce the high level of unexpected emission. It's as a first question. Another question, sometimes when we have, it's also, I'm economist and I know that during the war, economy law doesn't work. That's why even ecology law, even different kinds of regulation are not properly work, such as we try to every day understand how to behave and react. And in this side, from this point of view, it's necessary to understand how European Union society can help with maybe develop new technology in order to detect new kind of issue emission, first of all. Then, yes, we were thinking about green transition, we were thinking about ecology, but could you imagine if you have only during 4 hours electricity, how we can provide electricity for the whole energy system? And lots of people try to use EcoFlow system, yes, which they import from European Union country. But another issue, the time of expired is fixed for some cycles, and what we can do for the in order to do if the time is expired, what we can do with this kind of devices and how we can maintain the recycle of this technology. And in this way, providing something new, we also should take into consideration how we can avoid this after the term of expired. It's the main issues really. And our society tried, and our ecologists and our scientists try to understand how we can avoid this problem, but it's open, still open. Thank you so much. And so
Thank you, Marina.
Comments, but it's necessary to continue to work in this way with scientists, especially push our society in order to more fast react in order to overcome ecological issues.
Thank you, Marina, for your insightful comments. Eva, would you like to say something in response?
Yeah, just a very quick comment from my side. I mean, it's fully understandable and something we take very seriously in our project as well, that kind of we can't really talk about fully embracing any kinds of transitions and developments without the pushback of the horrible Russian aggression. So this is the vital thing that needs to have the most focus. However, one of the things that really has been very inspiring and something that countries in the EU really need to learn, I think, from Ukraine as well, is that the work that has been done with by the different environmental NGOs and experts in just even mapping the kind of damage that has been done by the war effort on the environment and working in very dangerous areas, still protecting the important biodiversity areas when the country really can't put too much effort on it is really, really important. And this is something that is a resilient strategy as well. If we, for example, in the Estonian society don't value and support our NGOs that are working on these things, when we need them the most, we might not have them and we might not have the strength. So this is quite a valuable lesson.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Eva. And Lauri, just a quick question. I'm mindful of time and hopefully a quick answer from Ivo.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. Yeah, thank you, Ivo, for this very enlightening presentation. I was wondering about, since you've done already kind of very nice work on with this survey on trying to figure out in society different attitudes that are held towards different aspects of the green transition. I was also wondering if we look at more broader among different stakeholders in society, did you notice that there are certain also coalitions, or was there something you looked at, whether there was certain, let's say, groups or coalitions or stakeholders that were interested in certain aspects of green transition or were against it? So were there something, or were there also differences between the countries? I don't know if we have time for that, but you can answer it as quickly as you want.
I think the strength is different within the countries. What does kind of come up is something that is very clear basically everywhere where you look at, even inside of Europe. You do have very strong kind of industrial groups that want to kind of limit the amount of regulation, mostly because it's costly and difficult for them to manage. So they so it depends on how well informed they are, and how well informed they are about the changes that are coming with EU accession depends on the country a little bit, both from the ability for them to actually communicate and for them to understand. So in Ukraine, definitely, I think the industrial and agricultural sides are the strongest in, I wouldn't say really kind of saying, oh, we don't want any of this, because of course they also see very much value in the transition, but of course being very mindful of the costs and kind of looking at ways to limit the issues that can come to them, which is again understandable. But of course, what is interesting to see is I think a lot of the really good things have come out of the NGOs kind of collaborating and cooperating. Today, our project is also part of a group of NGOs that are working in Ukraine. Not all of them are there locally, but most of them are. Called Build Ukraine Back Better, and this has been a very interesting kind of view on basically international and national NGOs coming together, exchanging information, developing parts of projects, and for example, even for us, finding experts through that has been very valuable. So there are some of these things, but I think from the perspective of like how it is in all of the different countries, this isn't really a limitation of our project because we did the mapping. I think it's more of a limitation of me just not being aware of all the aspects.
Right, so it's 2 p.m. sharp. Thank you. I think our time is up. Thank you all for your excellent questions. Thanks again, Eva, for your really interesting talk. And all of us, hopefully, if not all of us, many of us, will meet again next month. And maybe Kertu, you can remind us about your next talk in February. Who's going to be our speaker?
Yes, thank you, Anu. Our next seminar will be held on the 17th of February. And this time there will be water reporting with us, and looking forward to see you in our next meeting in February. And we will send you the detailed information about the next meeting also soon.
Yes, thank you, Kertu. And also Portsinga, who doesn't know, he's a really, really well-known figure in social sciences when it comes to environmental attitudes, climate attitudes. He's been behind on all sorts of reports based on survey data, so it's going to be such a treat. So looking forward to seeing you, many of you there. So thank you all. Have a good afternoon and speak soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ivo. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.